Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Opportunity Podcast. I'm your host, Greg, head of marketing over here at Empire Flippers. And today I have an incredible guest. I am bringing on Perry Marshall, the myth, the legend, the man himself, that literally wrote the book on Google Ads a few years back and was a massive influence on me as a marketer. Weirdly enough, I've never really done that much with Google Ads, but I've always been around Perry Marshall, always been like looking at his stuff. And he's just one of the legends of direct response marketing, in my view. But this podcast goes down a path I wasn't as much expecting, where Perry and I talked a lot about what it takes to grow a much bigger business, going from, not just seven figures, but like, how do we go to nine figures? And so much of it deals with what a lot of people would probably, classify as a little bit of woo woo, like know thyself, understand what's driving you. But really, at the end of the day, that is like the biggest leverage you have in business is understanding who you really are so you can really grow where you want to go. So this is a pretty deep conversation, to be honest. And I think everyone in our audience, so over at Empire Flippers, I think you guys will all get a tremendous amount of value out of this. I certainly did. I really enjoyed this podcast. It might have been like one of my favorite episodes of the year. So with that said, I do have one other thing I need to say. We had some technical errors while recording this podcast, unfortunately. So part of the podcast is going to be edited together with a Zoom call I had with them. So you might have some audio changes, and that's just unfortunate. My podcast software, for whatever reason, decided to crap out on us about like 10 minutes or so into the podcast. But hopefully it doesn't come out that bad, and my editor can do some audio magic for you guys, because this was a really cool podcast. All right, I'll stop talking. Let's get into it. Let me introduce you to Perry Marshall. I'll see you on the other side. All right, everyone. I got the legend, Perry Marshall, here today. I am so excited to have this conversation with you, man. You and I have never interacted till just like this moment, but I've interacted with your stuff for years. So this is really, really cool to have you on the podcast. So for everyone who's not familiar with the legend, talk to us a bit about who you are and what you're doing and where you are in the world right now.
I got laid off as an engineer when my wife was 3 months pregnant with our first child, and I went into sales, which was 2 years of brutal bologna sandwiches, ramen soup, pounding the phone, driving my car all over Chicago, making skinny little commission checks, spiraling credit card debt. And I was just thinking about this morning. I got fired from that job and I took another job, and that job worked. I was actually paying my bills. The wolf was not at the door anymore. And it was a hardware, software, tech company in Chicago. And my boss asked me to come in on a Saturday to discuss stock options. And I came in and he said, "So we want to develop a chip. It's going to cost a couple $1,000,000. We've got angel investors that are helping us do this. And we like you, and I want to give you golden handcuffs." And he offered me stock options. He was asking me to take a cut in my commission rate and get in the relationship for the long term. And I said, okay. And I took the phantom shares. And then the next 3 years were, it would be fun if I said it was a magic carpet ride. Well, it was a slog. It was fun. There's no doubt that it was fun, but it was also kind of harrowing. We were growing that part of the business probably 50 or 60% a year, which is always painful, and cash was always short. During the last year that I worked there, because I worked there 3 more years, there were a lot of problems. There were personnel problems. There were personality conflicts. It was really bumpy. We sold the company to a public company for $18 million a month and a day after 9/11. And it was a miracle that 9/11 didn't completely obliterate the deal, but it didn't. It happened anyway. It happened because this company was trying to develop a similar chip, and they were behind schedule by 6 months. And they would have taken a beating from the public markets if they told the world they were late. So they went and bought us and just stuck our chip in there. And I got $250,000 out of it, which for me at that time was absolutely life-changing money. It got me out of debt and it gave me a year of runway to start the business I'm in now. And so getting equity as an employee is a very, very formative part of my story. And it was a early lesson. That's the real game. So not exactly the way I've normally told my story, but it absolutely is the way that it happened.
Well, you're on the Empire Flippers podcast, and all my listeners should know by now that equity is the real game. I always
Mhm.
tell people, like, how can you play entrepreneurship at the highest level? And I think the highest level is M&A. Like, that's like exactly what you just said. They bought your company because they were behind schedule. I have like, I have another friend that a very similar thing happened to him. They were trying to develop this AI tool. They're like, man, we're really bad at this. Like, no, we're like extremely bad at this. So they went and found an AI company somewhere in America, I forget where, and they ended up buying it. Now that AI company integrated into everything else they were doing is crushing it, right? So I agree.
Mhm.
Buyers and sellers is the highest form of entrepreneurship in that sense. So with the business you're in now, just to give the lay of the land a bit, tell us a bit about what you're doing today with your business.
So I'm probably best known now for my book, 80/20 Sales and Marketing. And it reinvents the Pareto principle. Most people don't really know that they don't know what 80/20 is. Like everybody's heard of it and everybody thinks they know, but they don't. And what 80/20 really is levers within levers within levers. And not only does 20% of what you do produce 80% of what you get, but 50% or 1% of what you do produces 50% of what you get. And probably 0.1% of what you do produces a quarter of what you get. And those levers within levers within levers are the things that private equity, VC, M&A people, equity, those levers are what those things turn on. And it's basically a law of physics that cause and effect is extremely disproportional, much more so than most people think. And so a lot of people know me for my books on Google and Facebook and TikTok and internet traffic and local business marketing. But 80/20 is really the sauce behind it all. And so, what I do now, what we do best, is we consult companies to get over what we call the 7-figure desert, which is going from 1 million to 10 million is a whole lot harder than it sounds. There's lots of people talking about scale. There's lots of people talking about systems. There's lots of people talking about processes and documentation, but there's almost always key ingredients missing from that. And usually those ingredients involve the fact that there's something intrinsic to the marketing that it has to be highly scalable. And there's all kinds of reasons why businesses should be able to scale in theory, but in reality will never be able to do it. And sometimes it's literally the size of the market they're in. There's a lot of people that they get some Facebook ads working or they get some Google ads working. And if I only had $1 for every time I heard people say, now all we have to do is scale it 10 times and we will be on Easy Street. And they don't know that 10 times the traffic will cost 100 times more money and the economics of the business will be completely upside down. They often don't know that when they get to usually around $4 or $5 million, they're going to be in a huge catch 22 because they need systems and processes to grow, but they don't have them. and they would only be able to afford the systems and processes if they already had the systems and processes. And then the business often just revolves around the owner and is really a glorified one-man band. So these are the things that we usually deal with. There is almost always also some serious fixing that has to be done in the sales team. There's usually dysfunction in that department and it's poorly managed. And so, the creator skill set of solving a problem, finding a customer, filling a need, making a widget, and the skill set of growing a company are usually radically different skill sets. So we help people muddle through the no man's land of the 7-figure desert.
I love you brought it up that that's a 7-figure desert. I literally was just writing a script for our YouTube channel right before this call. And I'm talking about like the early warning signs that you should probably sell your e-commerce store, but it really applies to any business. And I talked to so many entrepreneurs like, oh, I don't want to sell yet because there's more juice to squeeze. And like, whenever I hear that line, there like I always think there's a guy who's probably going to not get paid like millions of dollars because of this mentality, because they don't realize like as you're growing the business, like you have that S curve, right? They always want to sell at the top, but your peak is also the valley of stagnation. Like that's when you need to redo everything in the business. It's almost like you're starting a brand new business. You got to like
Yeah.
change everything. So this
Yeah.
is this is a big thing. Like
Yeah.
I tell entrepreneurs all the time, growth can be just as much of a killer as not making any profit, right? Like it's a whole new business. So that leads me into my first question for you. So what are some of the indicators here for a business that is ready to scale where that growth won't kill them, and how can that owner prepare for that growth phase, if that's not true for them yet?
So I think the biggest indicator is that the company we're talking about is clearly number one in their market. And I need to be very explicit what I mean by that. What I mean is within the particular niche that they occupy, scratching the particular itch that they scratch for the particular customers, whoever they are, the very quirky people that they serve. There literally is nobody that's even within 50% of the size. They're at least 2 or 3 times their closest rival. That's an absolute requirement. And the second one is that there's a lot more demand where that came from. And usually the reason that demand is there and hasn't been satisfied is that somebody has not worked out a delivery mechanism that would satisfy that need on a larger scale. But the person we're talking to who's ahead of the pack has they're at least significantly ahead of others. So like I just talked to a guy a couple days ago, and he's in the lead generation business, and he found a niche where there's a lot of what I call bleeding necks. There's a lot of customers that really need something bad. And there are a few service companies out there that will fulfill this, but he's already sending leads to the biggest ones, and he's sending as many as they can take. But there's still more demand over here. And the conversation we had, I think this was literally last Monday, was so you guys are in the traffic business and you guys are really good at slinging the bits. If you can figure out how to deliver this very messy, like, service that requires talented professionals and processes and all the rest of it, you guys have this market all to yourself. And you guys can grow from you're currently in 8 figures, you could probably get it up to 9. And the guy says, yeah, but if I had to run a business like that, I would shoot myself in the head. And I totally get what he's saying. And I said, so you have a who question, not a what or a how question. And if you find the right person who's like, oh yeah, I like herding cats and I like processes and I can run a call center or like whatever it is. If you find that person, you can have a 9-figure business without wanting to jump off a bridge. And I find myself having these kind of conversations more and more and more. And I understand because I'm a very quirky person myself. I totally get they don't want to do this and I wouldn't want to do it either. But I also understand that is the best thing. You can get it to work, best thing you could own. And it's the best thing you could turn around to sell to somebody else. And there's a reason why the markets value an animal like that. There's a reason why PE firms are looking for stuff like that. It's really hard to do. And if the PE guys knew how to do it, they would do it.
Of
But
course.
they're just sitting there with money and they don't know how to do it. Or maybe they would be doing it. Or maybe they did it once and they don't ever want to have to do it again. But in any case, the marketplace highly values the person who can make that equation work.
So yeah, what you just said there, I think deserves to be like unpacked a little bit because it's extremely important. And I don't think enough people, especially in my audience, think about this. Is like there's the four horsemen of wealth, is what I always describe it as. Is like one is coding, which is the weakest in terms of like skill set, and then sales because it's one to one, marketing second because it's one to many, and then delegation is number one because you get all the other
Yeah.
horses riding with you, right? And that who question, like understanding how to delegate is so important. And your lead generation friend, so I have a bunch of friends in the affiliate space, which I'm sure you do too, who
Yeah.
they're sending all this amazing traffic and they're just losing it all because they're sending amazing traffic to the worst business model, right? Which is affiliate and like ads. So I think this is awesome. Maybe you can like double click into that. Like, so what happened with your friend? Is he going to pursue pursue the business that he hates? Is he going to find someone to like do it with him, or what was
Well,
the
so
ending?
I think I know somebody who can do it with them and they've done it before. And so I may introduce that person, but I told the guy, it was two guys, I said, you guys need to go have a cup of coffee together and you need to make a little grid that says, these are the things that I am good at. These are the things I am willing to do. These are the things I am not willing to do. These are the things that we need. And this is the job description of the person who would enjoy herding all these cats and putting all this together, because you have to remember that for every job you hate, there is a person who loves that job. I cannot fathom being a bookkeeper, but I have a bookkeeper and they like their job. So, the mysteries of the universe, why anybody would want to do that, but I'm not insulting them. I'm really glad that they like doing that kind of work. And this is like that. And you know what this your four horsemen, they remind me of, I have a longtime client and friend named Tim Francis, and he coined what he calls the 5 levels of 80/20. And it's a pyramid, and the bottom of the pyramid is the lowest leverage and the most basic, and the top of the pyramid is the highest leverage and the highest risk. And here are the layers. Layer one is personal. It's getting out of bed in the morning. It's your moral and religious and spiritual values and your family and, the machinery of your life. And then there's the skill level. And the skill level is learning how to code, learning how to sell, learning how to write Google ads, learning how to, how to be a bookkeeper. That's level 2. Level 3 is managing people with skills. It's the manager level. Level 4 is the CEO level, which is managing managers. And level 5 is the investor level, which is managing CEOs, which shouldn't take a lot of time. And, the people with the money just hire a CEO. And as Tim says, the highest levels are where there's the most leverage. That's the place where you could make $100,000 an hour or $1 million an hour. It's also the place where you can go splat the hardest. And you have to master the levels below. You have to have skills. You have to know how to find managers. Have to know how to manage managers. And you probably have to know quite a bit of that stuff in order to hire somebody who knows how to do it and for you to know that they know how to do it. And so I think, your four horsemen and Tim's five levels are almost the same thing. And I come from the marketing world, and marketers have the illusion that they already have scale in their back pocket because they can reach lots of people. But almost all marketers get stuck at roughly $3 or $4 million. Almost like 98%. They'll only get that far, and it's because you can be a crackerjack marketer, which is a skill set, and you can attract a lot of people, but your ability to herd the cats will still peak out at about $3 or $4 million. And once in a while, you'll find somebody who's all like they're an affiliate or something, and they get 20 million or $100 million, but it's usually very fragile, and it could blow up. Like they could step on one landmine and the whole thing just completely unravels. In fact, probably that wouldn't even be possible without big technology platforms like the ones we have today. And so I've
Yeah.
seen a lot of people crash and burn by thinking that marketing is the ultimate skill.
I 100% agree. I mean, on a smaller level, so I have a friend that lives nearby with me, a good buddy. We hang out all the time. He was crushing with his affiliate marketing campaigns, 500 grand a month of profit, right? He ended up having to move out of his penthouse and lost it all. And people are like, oh, did he really make that much? It's like, no, you just don't understand how the game works. Because yeah, he was making that much money, but then the offer went away, and then he was spending like 100 grand a month trying to find another offer to work, right? Like, so
Yeah.
it goes away super quick. It's so fragile. I told him
Yes.
for years, like, dude, you need to buy a business or start a business because you're so good at traffic. And he just always like, oh, you're trying to sell empire flippers. Like, I'm really not, dude. I'm like telling this to you as a friend. Like, you are on a bad path. And so a couple of years ago, after he lost his penthouse, he ended up taking my advice. He started a business he's actually passionate about. Luckily, is in a digital product niche, and now he's doing better than he was as an affiliate. I mean, he's not making those same amount of numbers, but he's still doing six figures a month, and it's just one person, and he's loving life. It's way less stressful. He had this Indian credit card system going around where these people had to sign up for new Facebook ad accounts for him because, typical affiliate just burning his accounts. So yeah, I totally agree with you, man. Marketers, we like to think we have the scale, but it's the delegators that have the real skill.
And I should also add that if you're not going to jump across that seven-figure chasm from like 3 million to 10, which is a complete phase transition. Like if you want to run a $3 million business and you don't want to do all that, then you have to stop pouring money into your business and start taking money off the table. And that's another thing that like almost no marketing gurus will ever tell their clients to do, that because that means they'll stop giving them money. And I learned that the hard way. It took me a long time to figure out, no, you're not going to scale this thing just by being a better marketer and being better at doing product launches or better at buying traffic or whatever. You're going to have to overcome two limitations. A, you're going to have to like hire a CEO or something and get a lot of cats herded. And you're also going to have to be able to scale your audience and what you deliver in a way that, so those are two completely different problems, and you're going to have to solve them simultaneously. And so, once again, this is why most people don't make it past the seven-figure desert. Now, what a lot of people also don't realize is that a company at $3 million might have a 1 or 2x valuation, and a company at 10 could have a 3 to 5x valuation, which means the jump from 3 million to 10 is not a 3x in equity, it's more like a 10x. And so that phase transition it's one of the most valuable things in business.
Absolutely. It is a big reason why buyers buy those businesses from us to get them to that 10 figures. Like that private equity hot potato, like sell it
Mhm.
up the chain. So let's go into the 80/20 stuff here a little bit more with what you're talking about. Walk us through how you would apply, these series of levers to a business's growth.
Well, the first is to understand that 80/20 is the way that it is. And again, everybody's heard of it, and everybody probably knows that 80% of your money comes from 20% of your customers. But what people don't realize is that it's fractal, and that the top 20% of the 80% also produces 80%. And the top 20% of that also produces 80%. And so as you go up and up, you have extreme levels of leverage. And so this manifests itself in a bunch of interesting ways. So, for example, in my book, 80/20 Sales and Marketing, I have the principle of the $2,700 espresso machine. And it says that if you have 1,000 people a month buying $5 lattes at your coffee shop, it's basically a law of physics that one of those 1,000 people will spend $2,700 on a gleaming stainless steel espresso machine. And do the math, that gets you from $5,000 revenue to $7,700 of revenue in one step with no extra customers. And the purpose of the lattes is just to keep the lights on and keep the employees employed. There's no money in selling the lattes. All the money is in selling the espresso machine or equivalent. And so this also means that if 50% of your money is not coming from 1% of your customers, you are leaving a bunch of money on the table. So if you run a coffee shop, 1 out of 1,000 customers will buy an espresso machine. 1 out of 10,000 will take their whole family on a barista cruise in the Mediterranean at, $7,000 a head, and they'll buzz on caffeine all week. And you don't even know that, somebody in your audience just spent $30,000 last week on coffee, but they did. And so what business are you really in? 80/20 tells you that the business people think you're in probably isn't the business you're really in. And if this is new to you or it doesn't really ring some bells, you've got some investigating to do. There might be a whole other business out there that you don't realize that you should be in. Another consequence of this is in hiring. 80/20 says that it's pretty much a law of physics that if you hire 10 salespeople, two of them will significantly outperform the other eight put together. Not just the other eight put together. One of them will sell more than 6 or 7 combined. And if that's true, then the world is working correctly. This is how the world is. And so it changes your philosophy of hiring from doing an interview to having an audition. I think there are a lot of positions where when you hire a person, you shouldn't even probably talk to them very much. You should just give them something to do and see how well they do it. And you should probably hire them with a 14 or 30-day grace period where, like, hey, if you don't like me after 30 days, we could just, go our merry way. And if I don't like you, and there's no harm, no foul, it's not like some judgment. Like, I grew up thinking you go get a job and you beat yourself into submission to make sure you do a good job for your employer, and then you never ever leave, or at least, not for like 3 or 4 or 5 years. The idea of just like speed dating a job, just like, can we just try this for one day or 1 week and see if it's even a fit. I think there's many positions where that's how you should do it. I've done many projects where I hired somebody on Upwork and I just hired 3 people instead of one. And I go, I'm going to have all 3 of them do it. One of them will do it better than the others. And spending 3 times the money is worth getting the best result from the best person, because then I'll hire that person more and more and more. And so 80/20 informs almost everything you do. And it's in every spreadsheet, it's in every Google, Facebook, TikTok account, it's in every email, opens, clicks, how many people showed up to your Zoom meeting. All of this stuff is 80/20. And when you finally see it, you will never unsee it. It will suddenly be blindingly, blazingly obvious. You'll be obsessing about it and talking to your spouse, and she'll be like, man, this guy like talks about 80/20 all the time. This is because it's everywhere. I could look out my window and there's 10 80/20s right outside my window. I could rattle them off in 10 seconds. I think 80/20 is the biggest skill that you master in business.
I love this. You're reminding me of when I first learned, like my background is kind of direct response copywriting. Not saying I'm like a master of it, but that's kind of my background.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first learned about the concept of like order bumps, I had a friend, he had an e-commerce store. I forget what he sold. Is something like sponges or something. And he's telling me he had an order bump to go from 1 sponge, 2 sponges, 5 sponges, 10 sponges. Like, this is all pretty reasonable. But then it went up to like 100, five
Yeah.
hundred sponges. Like, what psychopath is buying 500 sponges in one go? He's like, actually, people do it. I was
Yes.
surprised too.
Yes. For every, so 80/20 says for every 1,000 people who buy one sponge, one person will buy 500 sponges. And I mean, that is literally exactly what the ratios are. And so when you start stacking up, okay, so I sold a whole bunch one, and then I sold 20% of them bought five, and 2% of them bought 50, and 0.2% of them bought 500. You sell two, three, 4 times as many sponges. And you can know this just by understanding power laws and logarithms. You're like, oh, wait, didn't I learn something about that in high school? Oh, yeah, well, there's a reason why these things exist. It's just your math teacher never told you. This is one of the most practical things you could ever learn. And this is not about following the column on the chalkboard. This has nothing to do with that. This is an immensely practical daily life skill. And really, if you can see 80/20, you can go into any business and you can fix it. I mean, this is more and more what I have more and more situations where a person who has invested in a company comes to us and says, this company I own has problems. Can you help us fix it? And then we go start looking for stuff. And usually there are very significant gains that could be made in fairly short periods of time. And they're right under your nose all the time. But if you don't know what to look for, you don't have the filter, you don't see it.
Yeah, and this is the reason why hiring outside consultant is often a good thing. It's like you're like a toad boiling in the stew of your own business, right? You just don't see it because you're too close to it,
Yeah.
and often
Yeah.
it's just incredibly obvious so
Yeah.
to someone who's not like accustomed to it, right? So let's talk a bit about this growth strategy stuff. I really dig this, but how does someone apply the 80/20 to their business? Like, let's say they are in that seven-figure desert you're talking about. So like, okay, Perry told me to hire 3 people off of Upwork. What else do I do? Like, what's the process of applying this across your whole business?
So I'll take this in 2 steps. First, there is a fundamental lifestyle perspective, which is if you don't have empty space in your day, you'll never be able to think. Bill Bain, who founded Bain Consulting, said, don't let action drive out thought. Now, when people are young, starting entrepreneurs, they're thinking about stuff and then they start buying courses and stuff and Some of them don't even take the shrink wrap off. And those of us who do take the shrink wrap off, we think it's all about execution. And you know what? Up to about $1 million revenue, it is all about execution. But as soon as you start hiring people and managing people and having teams and any of that, you have to have space to think about your business and step outside of your business. And you need to go for a walk or go for a hike or go for a bike ride or spend some time in the coffee shop and go meet people and not just be in your business all the time. And this needs to be baked into your lifestyle formula of your life. I call it Renaissance time, and I insist. So we have a program called Roundtable, and it's a peer advisory mastermind group. And I changed Roundtable for 2025, and we just took a hatchet to the whole thing. Every member that comes in, we are not accepting them unless they are a star business, which I'll get to in a minute, or we think we can drive them to a star position. And we are signing a skin in the game agreement with them that says, if you do everything we tell you to do and you don't hit a target that you and I have defined together, I'll refund 120% of your money. So they could invest 40 grand and get 50 back if it doesn't work. But we're going to require some things of you. So we require that you do the stuff that we ask you to do. And one of them is you have to do at least 10 minutes of Renaissance time every morning before you do anything else. In Renaissance time, it could be yoga, it could be prayer, it could be meditation, it could be reading your Bible, it could be walking your dog, but you have to do something meditative before you watch CNN or get into your email box or do social media or anything, because you need to think and you need to be a living, breathing human being and not just somebody with a bunch of alarm bells going off. And I call that Renaissance time. And people who have been in the entrepreneur squirrel cage for too long become almost neurotic when they don't have anything to do. No, I want you to stop doing stuff and I want you to think about what you're doing. Like during your Renaissance time, I want you to look at your day and think strategically and maybe meditate or ask the muse or, whatever your religious practices are. And I want you to tune into wisdom. And I want you to wisely go through your day instead of reacting. And for most people, that is a major adjustment. And I think it's absolutely crucial. The second thing is you need to be a star business. And I kind of alluded to this a few minutes ago, but let me spell it out. So remember when I said they need to be 2 or 3 times bigger than their nearest competitor, and there needs to be no obvious ceiling to growth. Like the market needs more, there's more demand out there. So that comes from the Boston Consulting Group Growth Share Matrix, which divides the world into stars, question marks, cash cows, and dogs. And I don't have time to explain it all here, but a star business is a business where you are number one in your market. You are bigger than anybody else that sells exactly what you sell or serves the same customer you serve. And your market is growing at least 10% a year. Now, what I just described, those are the only businesses that actually grow and make money. None of the other ones do. If your market's not growing 10% a year, you're in the wrong market. And if you can't be number one, you're in the wrong market. And you're going to have to find some part of the market where you can be number one. There is no point in being anything but number one. So your job is to stop busy, 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 do, react all the time, and think and research and explore. And you think and research and explore until you figure out how to be number one in a growing market. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Like, figure out how to be a star business. That is your only job. And once you figure out how to be a star business, then execute the star business and go find a CEO and go get the financing you need and get the thing growing. Because those are the only businesses that turn into big businesses, period.
I think that all makes sense. And I got to say, Perry, you have a much more elegant way of saying calling it Renaissance time. I
Mm.
call it my Don Draper moment. If you're familiar with Mad Men,
Okay,
so
that's
I
good.
not telling anyone to live a lifestyle like Don, but he does. There's like a scene in the show where he's just like laying on his couch for like hours in the office, and the people are like, "Does this guy like do anything?" He's like, "He's working right now. Don't bother him." Because he's just meditating, thinking about the campaigns, right? Very important.
The more your skill is worth, and the more of an artist you are, and the more of a creative genius you are, the more like Don Draper you are. And this is very hard for a lot of people to understand, accept, wrap their heads around. So, in several of my books, 80/20 Sales and Marketing, Detox, Declutter, Dominate, I have a little chart and it says, here's the column of $10 an hour opportunities, and here's the $100 an hour opportunities, and then there's the $1,000 an hour opportunities, and then here's the 10K. So $10, 100, and 100 for sure are get your little buns in gear and go, 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 and nose to the grindstone and get your head down and just do it. All those types of jobs are on the clock things, and they're usually fairly predictable. As soon as you get into $1,000 an hour and up, you are in the realm of sporadic, unpredictable, occasional, huge gains. And you can't string them together like beads. They come when they come. And they don't come when your head is down all the time, working, 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 working. Your most productive time is almost never sitting in front of your computer. It's having space to think. Your best ideas will come to you at a rock concert, or while you're pushing your kid on the swing, or while you're hiking or riding your bike or kayaking or something. They're not going to come to you while you're sitting at your desk in your office, or they're going to come in a conversation in a bar, drawing on a napkin. And Don Draper understands this, and the guy that wrote the script for that show understands this. And they obviously studied creative geniuses because that's how they work. And there's a lot of people, they have a suspicion that they are a creative genius and they're a little afraid to admit it. And on some days and on other days, they're just moaning because I know I'm a creative genius and why doesn't the world accept it? Well, accept it and start being it. My staff knows that I travel. I went to Antarctica 3 years ago. Like, who goes to Antarctica? Well, it was the most amazing thing I've ever done. It's heartbreakingly beautiful. I got so much inspiration out of that trip. I can't even tell you. Well, some people would think that's narcissism. No, it's my creative process. It's how I come up with good ideas. And my staff has learned, okay, Perry's off, he's in Portugal or whatever, and he's probably going to come back inspired. And I do. And I come back, I'm like, you guys, I had a giant realization. Here's what we're doing next. And that's how creative geniuses are, and accept it and be a genius.
I love that, man. You and I are probably somewhat similar, I would guess. Not saying I'm a creative genius, but like to play
Well, you
one on
can be if you
TV.
want.
But
I'm not against it.
so I always hire people. I didn't do this when I first became manager, but now that I have more experience, I always hire people who are very orderly and very like all the ducks are in the row because I know I'm this crazy hurricane that I just need them. Like the wind is blowing, capture this in the bottle for me. When I go to conferences or whatever, similar to you, like, okay, see you guys in like a week. Right. I don't think entrepreneurs give themselves enough time to do that. Like, I remember talking to a guy, he's like, I don't want to watch movies anymore. I don't play games. I don't read books. Like, everything's productivity. I was like, okay, well, first of all, you're telling me this at 3 a.m. in a nightclub in Bangkok, like it's obviously you're not that committed to it, but you should definitely go read a novel, go touch grass. It's good for your business, you know? So I'm really glad you're spending time talking about that. So when you're in this seven-figure desert, say I'm a $3 million company, trying to become a $10 million company, and I have the potential to be a star company if I'm not already. What are some of these like common bottlenecks that you've seen working with people like to grow their Renaissance time to leverage the 80/20? What are some of the things you've seen?
Well, for Renaissance time, you just have to do it. And you should think of it as the luxury that you absolutely positively deserve to give yourself and that it is okay. I think a lot of people I know, if you go really deep down into their psyche and their childhood and all the rest, they are fighting a sense of unworthiness that they got from their parents or their school or wherever it came from. And they're trying to pay off some psychic debt that'll never get paid off. So I was like this to a horrible extreme like 25 years ago. And it was, as long as I'm working really hard, I'm not a bad guy. And nobody can like point a nasty finger at me and get me in trouble or say that I'm not doing my work. Well, that's kind of an immature, like, oh, I'm okay because I'm busy. That's a very low level of awareness. And it often means you're just uncomfortable inside your own skin. So, some people honestly need to do some introspection and they might need to go get a counselor or figure out, like, why am I so driven and why am I a crack addict? Like, where is this workaholism coming from? And then on a entirely practical level, let's just extend this. Can you leave for a day or a week or 2 weeks and not have your whole business fall apart? Well, that's a step. And there's a lot of people that can't do that. Like they can't even leave for 3 hours or stuff will start breaking. I think the first thing you do is you get an executive assistant. That can help a lot all by itself. Then you start asking questions like, how do I leave for a month? Now, leaving for a week and leaving for a month are two very different things. And being able to leave for a month is probably a whole quantum leap beyond leaving for a week. So now you have to say, well, why does the deal making, the selling, the marketing, the product delivery depend on me? So that gets right into the middle of your four horsemen once again. Like, how do I hire people and delegate and get this to happen? And I think the truth is you have to decide what level of autonomy you're willing to fight for and kind of like die on the hill for, and where you're not. There are a lot of people who could run a perfectly sane $2 million business, be at the center of it, but have some help and be able to go on a week vacation and not hire a CEO or anything. And that for them could work just fine. But you're going to have to be okay that you can go on vacation for a week, but not a month. And then if you want to see, if you go on vacation for 2 or 3 months, you could sell your company. That's the territory that you are all about.
Come on over and sell all the businesses with us. Yeah.
Right, right. But if you're going to do that, then you need to decide, well, this is what we're doing. This is what we're in for. And we're going to tighten our belt and we're going to hire the right people and we're going to make sure that they're not the wrong people and all the rest of it. And we're going to make that phase transition. And you got to be all in. And you probably have to also be able to scale the marketing and the market demand. And so the planets are going to have to line up, or you have to make them line up.
I feel like you're really validating me throughout this entire conversation, Paris. So thank you.
Well, we
When
certainly didn't premeditate this in any way.
yeah. Whenever an entrepreneur asks me, like, how valuable is my company? I always come back with a bit of a cheeky response. I ask them, how important are you to your company? He's like, oh, I'm, entrepreneur ego, right? Like, I'm the linchpin. I'm doing this, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, well, you don't have a very valuable company then. They're like, what?
Mhm.
What do you mean? Like, I mean, the buyer's not buying you, they're buying the business, right? So they
Yeah.
want to buy a system. Like I always tell people, if you can't go away from your business for a month, then you probably don't have a very sellable business. Like, because they want to buy an investment, not a job, right? So I
Yeah.
think this is all super important, whether, someone in the audience is looking to buy or sell a business. Like, that's the way to set it up. Like, delegation unlocks basically everything, right? In terms of like scaling, so you were talking about scaling marketing, scaling market demand. And I think this is a very important thing too, because we mentioned earlier how growth can kill someone, right? So if rapid growth is often not sustainable, like what's your perspective on how the entrepreneur should do this journey where they're, at one moment they have to focus on growth, but they still need to pay the bills, right? So there still needs to be profitability. So are you like, how would you advise someone to juggle these two pillars as they go through that seven-figure desert?
Well, I think it depends on your skill set. I think you need to know, am I a manager or am I not? Am I a marketer or am I not? Am I a salesperson or am I not? Am I a negotiator or am I not? I don't think this is the same answer for all people. This is one of my problems with most books about systems and business scaling is the book usually presumes some kind of skill set on the part of the owner that they may not have. And so, I wish I had like a formula, but what I'm really saying is that you really need to know yourself. It goes back to my story about the two guys with the lead generation business. Like, you guys need to go to a coffee shop and sit down for a couple hours and figure out, what are we good at? What are we not? What are we willing to do? What are we not willing to do? What's all the stuff that somebody else is going to have to do and do well? And how are we going to know that he's doing well? Do we have to hire somebody to kind of check in and see if he's doing well because we don't even have the skill set? It's like hiring a translator. When I was in the tech business, we sold products from this German company, and the German company would hire a German company to translate stuff into English. No, you don't hire a German company to translate German and English. You hire an American company to translate stuff from German to English because the German company doesn't speak American English. But why did they hire them? Because they spoke German and they speak German. So, like, this is the conundrum. Maybe what I'm saying is you have to have a way of proving that the translator is doing a really good job, even though you don't speak German or you don't speak English. And I think that's what it comes down to is there's going to be a translator and you have to validate translation in a language that you don't speak. And it's possible to do it. We could all figure out if we had readers and people consuming content, there's easy enough ways to find out, is that person speaking perfect English or is that person speaking perfect German? But you have to have another reference point.
So this is a very literal example of what you're talking about. So a few years ago, I sold I think it was like a $900,000 Amazon affiliate site. And so I'm in Vietnam at the moment. I've been in Vietnam for a long time. And this guy's Vietnamese. He's up in Hanoi. After we sold the business, I flew up and said hi to him, like had coffee, celebrate, whatever. Turns out he didn't speak any English whatsoever. I was like, wait, what? And the Amazon affiliate site is all written in English, selling to the American audience. And a woman came with who was like a Vietnamese lady who teaches English at a college up there. And turns out she was the one managing the deal in terms of like selling the deal on his behalf, and now he had to bring her because he didn't speak any English to talk to me. And I asked her, like, well, how did you do this? How did you manage your writers? He's like, oh, I paid her like 20 bucks an hour to tell my Filipino writers what to write because I didn't know how to communicate with like, he didn't know how to communicate with his company. He had to
Wow.
hire a literal translator to make it work. So that's a very apt metaphor that I've seen play out literally in real life.
Yes.
That's awesome. For businesses that are stuck at this plateau, and again, it might be like a boiling toad scenario where they just don't see what they don't see. What would be your first step to reignite growth? They're at $3 million. They want to go to that 10 million. They can't seem to like translate it properly. Like, what would you recommend them to do?
Well, I think you have two questions you have to answer. The first question is the growth limited by my market or is it limited by my delivery mechanism? So if you could sell and deliver 10 times more, would there be buyers for it? And could you get them at an acceptable acquisition cost? You have to answer that question first. And if the answer is no, then go fix that. If the answer is yes, then you can go to the next step, which is okay. So now I have to scale. So what parts of this are require me or require very scarce human resources that has to somehow be circumvented? Whether, maybe you have a famous surgeon that works for you, or maybe you're the famous surgeon and there's only one. So how do we get two or five or 10? I think you have to do it in that order. And if you fix the delivery problem, but you don't fix the market capacity problem, you still have a problem. And now you spend all this money on delivery mechanisms and you have nobody to sell to. So I think that comes in two steps.
I agree. Even on the smaller level, I knew a guy building this app, and I was like, "Oh, what's the app about?" He's like, "It's a learning app." Like, "Oh, like a language learning app?" He's like, "No, everything learning app, like an everything learning app." I was like, "Well, have you got any customers?" Like, "No, it's not built yet." Like, "Oh, how long you been building it? For a year?" Like,
Oh,
maybe you should run
heavens.
like $500 to Facebook ads and see if anyone's interested before you spend any more time. But yeah, I agree. It's kind of like the balancing of both of those two steps. I know we're coming up on time, and I had a bunch of Google Ad questions I want to ask you too, but I want to ask you at least one Google Ad question before we wrap up the podcast, because
Yeah.
I have a couple other questions unrelated to Google Ads. But just a real quick Google Ad question. I'm curious on your thoughts with this. So, in my world, like my background is a lot of copywriting and SEO and a little bit of Google Ads, nowhere near as much as you. Right now, with AI that's coming in, and kind of like wrecking Google's organic stuff. And there is fear that like Google AdWords himself will start going away for a lot of info queries. Like, what are your predictions in the age of AI with like Google as a whole from both an SEO and a PPC ad standpoint?
I have a couple friends that have been arguing about this, and one of them thinks that Google is the new Yahoo. In other words, like they're toast and ChatGPT is going to take over the world. And one of them thinks that Google is just biding their time. They have more data than anybody, they have more training data than anybody. And they're waiting for ChatGPT and Perplexity to all get bruised up and stumble over legal problems and antitrust problems and all the rest. And then Google is going to come in and clean up. I don't know which of those is true. You can make both arguments, but I would like to unpack something that I think that will happen, whether Google ends up being continuing to be the 800-pound gorilla of the internet, or whether it ends up being more like ChatGPT becomes the 800-pound gorilla. And here's what it is: the trend in search advertising and internet advertising, which I've been doing now for 22 years, has been they take more and more and more things away from the advertiser's control. So they used to tell you all the keywords and all the keyword volumes, and you had control of all the match types. And then, like, the Cracker Jacks would dial all that stuff in. And Google's like, no, we want this to be a black box and we want to decide how much you pay for stuff. And we don't want you to know anything. We just want you to insert dollar, enter web address, and click a button that says advertise. And then we just whack your credit card for the rest of your life. So that's what they want. So what AI, I think, is going to do is you're going to go to an advertising engine that's really an AI engine. And just like I'm sure most people that pay attention to AI know that nobody knows precisely how any of these things work. They only know generally how it works, but they don't know all the little neural networks that it creates and
Including the people who created it. Yeah.
right, right. It's even a black box to them.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think what you're going to see is insert money into black box, and by God knows what hypnotic, bizarre versions of cause and effect out on the internet that they somehow have control of, we will mysteriously send you buyers, and you will have no idea how they got there, where they came from. You may not even know who they are. You will just have money in your checking account from the people that bought it. And I think that's at least bound to be half true, at least, because of the way that neural networks and LLMs work. It's kind of like Jim Simons is the guy with a huge, huge hedge fund that's run by AI, and Jim died a year or two
Ah,
ago.
yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I've heard
And
of
this
this.
hedge fund, they only accept like certain rich people to invest in it. And they make like 60% a year. And it figures stuff out just from seeing correlations that, no human has enough brain cells to ever figure out. And it's also one of these black boxes, and it just makes enormous returns year after year, which of course it could also suddenly fail for some inexplicable reason and nobody would know why. Like that's true too.
Yeah.
And the big platforms all want to do that. I absolutely guarantee you that is what they want to do. And then what stands in contrast, I was just in Bangkok 2 weeks ago, and a guy came to a workshop that I was doing, and he said, every so often, my Google account manager swindles me into, she seduces me into, let's just flip this over to machine learning, and it'll cost a little more at the beginning, and then it'll learn, and it'll be better than anything you do. He goes, I always lose my ass. And then I always go back to the old thing and I go read your book from 2006. And I think you're always going to have a yin and yang between those two. Like, I don't think AI is going to get rid of humans any more than the internet got rid of humans. Look at how many Uber drivers are driving around. Like, Uber needs the drivers just as much as they need Uber.
There
So,
was a thing I saw on LinkedIn where AI is going to kill all marketing agencies. So I'm a bit of a troll, if you couldn't tell. So I was like, oh, I'm sure the Fortune 500 CEOs can't wait to like fire their designers so they can spend all day in a mid-journey Discord chat, to making their own images, right? Like I'm sure that is like what their like master plan is to do. But yeah, I agree. I never thought about it in that way, but it makes a lot of sense with what you're saying about taking away control because you see that with meta ads too, where like and granted, their machine learning is actually like, pretty decent now, but you are seeing them taking away those controls. Like I remember, so I used to work in the oil field, and one of the ways I would troll my boss on an oil rig when I was still learning marketing, I would scrape his UID on Facebook, run a Facebook ad in Alaska, only targeting him. So he's the only person who can see it. And it would be like a picture of me and him hugging, but I would spend like $10, $20 a day, honestly, just see it constantly, And it freaked him out so much. I told him I'll stop if you don't make me clean the pits. I don't want to clean the pits anymore. That's why I was doing it. But then, of course, you can't do UIDs anymore. I'm sure there's some black hat way of doing it. But back then, they allowed you to do it as part of their thing. So, yeah, I agree with that sentiment. Okay, before we get into the rapid fire section, I do have one final question for you before we go into the rapid fire. And it is, what has been the best business advice you've ever heard or received?
build a star business.
I mean, that sounds like a good thing to do.
So one of my mentors is Richard Koch, and he wrote the original 80/20 book. He wrote a book called Star Principle, which is a treasure trove. He's worth 1.6 billion. We've been friends for about 12 years. And Richard says Star Principle is more important than 80/20. And this is a person who, like me, believes that 80/20 is the first thing that you should learn in business because it explains why almost everything that works actually works. It's because the world runs on feedback loops, and 80/20 is the math of feedback loops. It's the math of rewarded behavior. So 2 14-year-olds try Jack Daniels. One of them likes it, one of them likes it. And 30 years later, one of them has a drink a week and the other one has 3 drinks by 10 o'clock in the morning.
True writer, Don
That's
Draper.
80. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's an Irish writer. That is 80/20. 80/20 is, well, he liked it a little more, so he drank it again, and he liked it a little more, so he drank it. That's 80/20. And everything works that way. So back to your question, what's the best advice you ever got? Build a star business. When I learned the Boston Consulting Group matrix and stars, cash cows, question marks, dogs, I realized, hey, wait a minute. Everything that's ever worked for me was a star business, even if it wasn't a business. Like I had this thing that I did at a church a long time ago, and it wasn't a money thing at all, but it was a star. Like there was a market, there was people that wanted something, and I was doing something and it was working and people loved it. That's a start. It applies to lemonade stands, it applies to General Motors. And so if you put the automotive industry on the BCG matrix, Tesla is more valuable than General Motors, Toyota, and Chrysler combined. That's 80/20. Why is Tesla so valuable? Because they're a star. Why are these other companies not valuable? Because they're either question marks or dogs or cash cows. There's probably a couple cash cows and some dogs in there. And the difference between a cash cow and a star is huge. And what it tells you is that if you can't be number one in a growing market, you can't fix it. So I'll give you an example right out of the automotive industry. There's a great book called American Icon, and it is a biography of Alan Mulally, who came from Boeing and turned around Ford 20 years ago. Ford was really in trouble 20 years ago. And Ford hired him away from Boeing because he had just fixed a bunch of problems at Boeing. So he was at Ford for 4 or 5 years. It's a great story of a turnaround. And he fixed all kinds of stuff. And it's one of those heroic kind of Lee Iacocca stories.
Real hero's journey stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great read. As soon as he left, Ford went right back to the way they were. So let me explain what's really going on, because I think I know. Alan Mulally is superhuman. And if you're superhuman, you can get a dog to act like a star because you can defy gravity and you have a reality distortion field and you can get people to do all kinds of crazy things. But as soon as the guy with the reality distortion field goes away, Ford goes back to being what they are, which is at best a cash cow and probably more like a dog because they're not number one in a growing market. And then if you look at what did he do that actually did work, he cut all the product lines that were dogs and he kept the ones that are stars, and it was basically pickup trucks. And he got them as far as they could get on pickup trucks, and then he left, and then they went back to being their regular dysfunctional self. I bet you Tesla is just as dysfunctional as Ford. I'm pretty sure it is because I'm pretty sure Elon Musk is a fairly dysfunctional guy, but he's number one in a growing market.
He's also number one in Diablo 4 or in top 20, just to, put that out there.
Yeah, well, so star principle eclipses all those other things. And that's what makes the company valuable. I'm sure Tesla has all kinds of culture problems, management
Yeah.
problems, technological problems, and the rest of it. But they're number one in a growing market, and that makes up for a lot of sense.
Is the person who wrote the 80/20 and the star principle, is that second book? Is that what helped create that Boston matrix you were talking about?
This is Richard. He learned from it. He worked for BCG and Bain a long
Okay.
time ago. And he was like, well, I've worked in 3 consulting companies and I've been a private equity investor. And 80/20 and the STAR principle are the two most valuable things I've ever seen in my entire career. They're more valuable than everything else put together. And I'm an 80/20 guy, so I'm all about that. And
I am going to read those.
I have emulated that, and it has served me very well.
Fantastic, man. We'll try to put the links to the books in the show notes for
Yeah,
everyone who wants to check it out. All right, well, we're on the final section. So, three rapid fire questions, three rapid answers. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, no pressure here, Perry, but I cannot publish the show unless it's very good. So, kidding, joking. All right, first rapid fire question. In your view, what are the best hidden growth opportunities right now for a digital business?
The biggest hidden growth opportunities are in using AI to make humans do better work. And I said it a particular way. I didn't say using humans to make AI do better work. I think that is possible for a few companies. It's very hard to do. Whereas you're a copywriter, let's talk about writing. I think it's incredibly hard to get AI to deliver 100% great writing. Very hard. But it's very easy for AI to get you to the first 80% in 20% of the time and get you started. And people forget what the goal is. You know, sometimes they think the goal is to write a sales page in 12 seconds, or they think the goal is for AI to do all of their work for them or something. No, the goal is to turn out great work. The goal is to say exactly what you intended to say and say the best thing you possibly could have said. And you use AI to make yourself better, including to challenge your thinking, to challenge your assumptions. Like, I think a lot of people don't realize you can have a conversation with AI and you can ask it a whole bunch of questions and you can ask it to challenge your assumptions and you can rigorously vet your thinking or your research or whatever so much faster than you could without it. And I think people have a big disconnect because it's so easy to get to the 80% level, which still isn't good enough, but it's, you know, it's 4/5 of the way. It's so easy to get to the first 80, like that level, that they resent carrying it across the finish line, like the last 20%, which may be a great deal of work. And that's just, you can't resent it. And you can't get caught up in this parlor trick of, well, look how easy that first draft was. Like when you're writing copy, and this is a metaphor for lots of other things, it could be graphics or writing software programs or anything else. It has to connect to the customer and it's got to really move them. And at the end of the day, we're still humans talking to other humans. I think one of the biggest misconceptions of the internet is that we're building our web pages for machines. Well, you know, I'm search engine optimizing, so I'm building it for Google, and so I got to please the machine. Well, there's some truth to that. But man, if humans don't like reading that page when they finally get there, you're completely wasting your time.
I agree. On the AI thing, like I use it all the time. I think it's from a creative standpoint, it's like my best brainstorming buddy. I just like constantly going back and forth, but I agree with you on the 80% thing with copywriting and really anything. Like the way I view it is kind of like Photoshop on steroids, you know? Like Photoshop didn't destroy graphic design, but it allowed a layman to come in and Canva even more. But now I can make something that's okay, you
Mhm.
know, like but a person who actually knows design can use these tools and just like skyrocket. So I agree with you. The second question here, what tools or resources would you recommend for people to check out to help grow their business?
So I have a page, perrymarshall.com/podcast. And there's three things on that page. One of them is an 80/20 quiz, and it helps you figure out how aware of 80/20 am I even in the first place. It also has a link where you can buy 80/20 sales and marketing for $7, including shipping in the US. It's 14 outside the US. And it comes with a bunch of tools that are extremely valuable. Like the book will completely change your life. I promise you it'll change your life. But like there's a tool in there called the marketing DNA test. And I created the marketing DNA test because I have consulted with lots of entrepreneurs. I can't tell you how many times I met a copywriter who's trying to make himself into a YouTuber or trying to make himself into a hostage negotiator
Just read Chris Voss.
or a salesperson who's trying to turn themselves into a copywriter or like, all the different skill sets. And they're like, oh, that's it. I have seen so many people just jam themselves square pegs into round holes. You need to know yourself, what your persuasion skills are, what they're not, what your management skills are, what they're not. I think it's all about know yourself. And I've probably alluded to that 3 or 4 times today. The 80/20 book has a tool bundled into it, marketing DNA test. Go take that test.
Can you ship to Vietnam?
Yeah, $14. Yes, we'll
You
shoot.
got a customer. You made an
Yeah.
ROI on this podcast, Perry. I'm gonna order it.
And take the marketing DNA test and get rid of all the marketing jobs that are not you or all the sales jobs that do not genuinely fit who you are and stop flagellating yourself over what you're not. And that's one thing that any equity investor who's at all successful has ostensibly done is they have figured out what they're not good at and they're buying it. And that is a major chess move.
Brilliant answer. All right, final question, and probably the hardest question on here. What has been your funniest moment since becoming an entrepreneur? This is a very serious answer.
My funniest moment is when I almost died on an island. And it's funny now, wasn't funny
Okay.
then. But I'll tell you a really quick story and I'll circle around because it has a business lesson. One of my favorite places on earth is the Great Blasket Island, which is 3 miles off the west coast of Ireland. Absolutely stunningly gorgeous, beautiful place. And I've been there a whole bunch of times. And I went there one time and I stayed in their little hostel. And I said to the guy, hey, I want to hike to the end of the island and just checking in with, he's like, yeah, no problem. But it's getting foggier later today and you need to watch out for that. And it's going to get a little colder. Okay. So off I go. It's probably 60 degrees F outside, which 15 C. I'm wearing 2 shirts and shorts and flip flops. So this island is 4 miles long and 1 mile wide. It's like a big long loaf of bread with 800-foot cliffs on one side. And I hiked to the end and my phone battery ran out. And now I didn't have a phone. And then I was hiking back and I was hiking and hiking and hiking. I'm like, aren't I there yet? Why am I not there yet? Hiking, 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 hiking. I look up, I'm at the end of the island and it's 9:30 p.m. Oh, this is really bad. Like there is no way I'm hiking that in the dark. I would fall off a cliff and die. Dude, you're sleeping here. So I'm under a rock 3 miles out into the Atlantic on a cold night with only shorts, flip flops, and 2 shirts, and no phone and no water. Very bad, very dumb. I shivered like, I don't know if you've ever shivered like seriously hypothermia shiver violently all night. And finally at 4 o'clock in the morning, oh, and I had birds attacking me. They didn't like me. I felt some rabbits go under my arm. Like I'm shivering under a rock. It started raining at about 1 o'clock in the morning. It was miserable. So 4:15 in the morning, it starts to get light. I crawl out from under the rock. And the whole time I'm hiking, I'm like, dude, you cannot get lost. You cannot get distracted. Like, not for 1 second. You got it. And it was still foggy. And I made it back. And I open the door and this woman looks up. She goes, "What happened to you?" So this is now 7:30 in the morning. I've been gone all night. She goes, "Killian was looking for you. He's calling you, calling you. He got your voicemail. He got your voicemail." So I tell her the whole story and she goes, "Three rabbits, three birds, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Somebody's looking out for you, pal." And I go up in my room, and in my room, this is kind of the punchline for today. My cell phone charger is sitting there on my nightstand, and my water bottles is sitting there, and my coat is there, and my jeans is there. And I could have brought all this stuff with me, but I didn't because I was just the silly optimist. And I had a guy, I wrote this up in a newsletter, and a guy reached out to me after reading my newsletter. He goes, "Perry, I lived in Cairngorm National Park across the street in Scotland for years. And every summer, an American would come out of that place in a body bag once a week. And it was exactly your story. Like, some guy, he's all optimistic and cheerful, and he's just going to go on a hike." And I learned two things from that experience is number one, I tend to go into things unprepared because I'm an improviser. And like I've done this a bunch of times in my life. This was not the only time. And secondly, when people are lost, they go around in circles and they don't know it. And I had some time to kind of digest this and absorb it and think about it and reflect on it. And I was like, doesn't this kind of describe every tight spot you've ever been in your life? You went into it unprepared. You could have taken your jacket. You could have taken your jeans. You could have taken your water. You could have taken your extra battery charger, but you didn't. And then you walked around in circles and then suddenly realized that you didn't know where you are. And then you had to sleep under a rock. Like, well, this would just this would describe, Amway. This would describe a bunch of businesses that like, oh, a little self-awareness is a good thing. And so, yeah, that's now the funniest thing that ever happened to me in my business. And I've written about it. I've talked about it. I've, given talks about it. And, people laugh and they cringe. And I got to tell you one little punchline about that. I took some people a few years later. I was traveling with some people and we went back to the island and I walked them all the way to the rock that I was shivering under a few years before. And there was one guy that was hiking with me and he goes, "Perry, this is crazy." He goes, "I have read about this. I've heard your talks about this. This is 100 times more dangerous than I ever thought it was from your stories. This is insane. I could take one wrong step and go tumbling into the ocean and they would never see me again. This is crazy. You've totally undersold this story." And I'm like, well, there you go. I'm glad I told it. Like, I'm not above telling you all the stupid things that I ever done in my life. I've done a lot of stupid things in my life. And yes, I'm lucky to be alive.
That's brilliant, man. I've improvised a lot in my life. Like when I was 19, I hitchhiked across America for like 50 days and I saw Into the Wild and it really inspired me to go do
Hmm.
that. But my dad always tells me like, yeah, you should always hope for the best, but just expect the worst.
Yes, yes,
It's a good motto to
yes.
live by. I do remember. Well,
For the
man,
best, expect the worst, and be prepared.
oh man, this has been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed this conversation. For anyone that wants to follow you, pick your brain, or maybe hire you for something, where's the best place to come and chat with you or learn more about you?
You can go to perrymarshall.com/podcast and you can pick up the 80/20 book for $7 or 14 international. And if you want to hear from me regularly, just go to my homepage and sign up for the Perry Marshall Minute, and we'll send you a short little email every day that will really provoke you to think.
I love it, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure.
It was great, Greg. Really great to meet you. I look forward to
You,
next time.
you too. There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you inspired at all the different things that are happening in this industry. And of course, if you just want to buy a highly profitable business, you can always go to empireflippers.com/marketplace. or maybe you want to make an exit of your highly profitable business, then you could go to empireflippers.com/sell your site. I've been your host, Greg. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review, give us a like, a follow, share it across social media. Talk to you all soon. See you on the next episode.